Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm really excited to bring you today's video. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Let's get started. Manfred Fritz Bajorat was born in a small town in Germany and had developed a deep love for the sea from a young age. His greatest dream in life was to live a solitary existence on the oceans. As the years passed, he began taking steps to turn this dream into a reality. In 2009, he decided to embrace the solitary life that a seafaring spirit required. And from that day forward, he set sail across the oceans, exploring the world on his boat. After a while, it became increasingly difficult for Bajorat's loved ones, friends, and even family to receive updates about the places he was visiting on his boat. When he set sail, he had decided to limit communication and devote himself entirely to the ocean. The sea was not just a living space for him, but also a place where he found inner peace, where every wave and gust of wind reminded him of his freedom. This lifestyle, however, made it unnecessary to leave behind many signs of communication. Although Bajorat's connection with the sea was deep, there were several key factors behind his boat's disappearance. By 2009, the last signals and updates from his boat gradually dwindled, and then he disappeared. Initially, Bajorat's family and close ones suspected that he had simply gone silent for an extended period, but soon they began to question if something more serious had happened. His last contact revealed that he was heading toward nearly unknown areas of the sea. Bajorat had not only decided to live with the sea, but with nature as a whole, which made his disappearance more plausible to many. In the weeks after he went missing, his family made global calls in search of any clues about where his boat might have gone. Some speculated he had sailed toward Southeast Asia, while others believed he might have gone toward the waters of the Americas. However, no leads surfaced regarding the missing boat. His family, still hopeful, waited for news, refusing to give up on the possibility of his return. Gradually, Bajorat's disappearance became a bigger mystery. The seas in the area he had been in were known to be especially dangerous, with natural disasters occurring and strong ocean currents. As the mystery of the missing boat deepened, various theories grew. Some speculated that Bajorat's boat had disappeared due to a maritime accident. The possibility of a storm or powerful waves in the depths of the ocean sweeping him away was considered. Dangerous currents in unknown and less charted regions of the ocean, bad weather, and the legends of sea monsters made the mystery of Bajorat's disappearance even more complex. Some people believed that a major natural disaster might have been the cause of his disappearance. Others raised the possibility that Bajorat's disappearance wasn't just an accident, but perhaps he had disappeared mysteriously. Could there have been an intentional element behind his boat's disappearance? Old stories about missing people in the area where Bajorat was last located led to eerie speculations about how people can vanish without leaving a trace in the sea. Some suggested that his disappearance might have been psychologically influenced, proposing that he had made some decisions in the loneliness of the sea. Finally, some believed that Bajorat's disappearance was part of a conscious escape story. Perhaps he had wanted to distance himself from life, people, and the outside world for a while. But these theories, too, remained nothing more than speculation. As the days passed, various stories and theories about the period of Bajorat's disappearance accumulated. He began to be remembered as one of the lost men of the sea, alongside other sailors who had vanished. His family, friends, and the global sailing community never gave up searching for the truth behind his disappearance. During the years he was lost, people came together to question whether he was still alive. No signal or trace was found. The waves, winds, and silence of the ocean during the time his boat disappeared were so powerful that it became impossible to determine if Bajorat was alive. However, years later, the discovery of his boat and the shocking truth that Manfred Fritz Bajorat had survived would stun the world. In 2016, exactly 7 years after Manfred Fritz Bajorat's disappearance, an event unfolded on the shores of the Philippines. Bajorat, who had been lost for 7 years, had become known as a solitary sailor who once set sail to explore the oceans. However, that year, the mystery of his disappearance, which had captivated the world, would be reignited on the distant shores of the Philippines. revealing a truth about Bajorat's survival that no one had anticipated. In 2016, near an island in the southern Philippines, an abandoned boat was found drifting toward the shore. At first glance, the boat seemed like a typical maritime accident or an abandoned vessel. Its darkened wooden surface was damaged by the corrosive effects of the salty seawater. The interior of the boat was nearly empty, left abandoned for many years. Everything suggested that the boat had been abandoned and that the sailor who once set out alone to explore the seas had been lost. However, some clues inside the boat began to lead investigators and local authorities in a new direction. Early examinations revealed hints about the identity of the boat's owner. The disappearance of a man who had ventured into the oceans had been an event that captured the attention of the world. Through meticulous investigation, records, maps, and other items found on the boat, it was confirmed that the boat indeed belonged to Manfred Fritz Bajorat. The mystery of how this boat had survived in the ocean for 7 years and drifted towards the Philippines remained unsolved. Initially, it was a mystery how the boat had continued to sail through the oceans after Bajorat's disappearance. Theories began to emerge about how such a lost boat had managed to move for so long. Many believed the boat's drifting could be due to natural ocean currents. However, given that the boat had been completely abandoned and was inoperable when Bajorat went missing, it suggested that there was something more behind its continued journey. The reasons behind the abandonment of the boat and why it had continued to travel on its own for so long became one of the greatest mysteries to solve. As researchers gathered more information about the missing man's boat, the history of the boat's journey became more intriguing. Bajorat's boat, which had gone missing in 2009, had initially disappeared without leaving any trace at sea. No radio messages, no signals, no GPS coordinates had been recorded. However, when it was found, years later it had drifted toward the Philippines, marking the final point of its long journey since it had set sail. The discovery of the boat not only shook the local community, but also deeply affected the global survivalist community. After Bajorat's disappearance, how his boat had survived, and the story behind its years-long journey across the oceans created a great sense of astonishment. Since Bajorat had disappeared, the world had found no evidence of his fate. No one knew how he survived or why he managed to stay alive after his disappearance. The research inside the boat revealed some significant information. Tests and detailed inspections showed that there were waterproof equipment and supplies used for survival inside the boat. There were clues indicating that Bajorat had tried to survive for an extended period. However, the suffering Bajorat endured during the time he was lost only deepened the mystery of his survival struggle. The discovery on the shores of the Philippines raised more questions about Bajorat's disappearance and started to shape a darker story of solitude and hardship. Everyone was curious about how this man had coped with loneliness, fear, hunger, and great struggles. The man who had been lost at sea for years, yet survived, remained a question mark. What was the inner strength that had kept him alive in a way no one expected? Manfred Fritz Bajorat's discovery, 7 years after he went missing, marked a moment that illustrated how survival and human will could push the limits. It was the story of a man who, lost in the middle of the ocean, continued to survive against all odds. However, the true events behind his disappearance were still not fully uncovered. What had really happened when Bajorat vanished? Was he truly alone during these 7 years? Or did he experience something else? These questions, even after the discovery of the... However, the discovery inside the boat and the autopsy of Bajorat's body brought forward another significant question. Was Manfred Fritz Bajorat really alone, or had he spent his final years in a different way without anyone knowing? The location of the boat truly carried the traces of a man's last struggle for survival after venturing into the seas alone. Investigations revealed that Bajorat's boat had been abandoned and had been drifting at sea for a long period. However, the real shock came with the discovery inside the boat. Manfred Fritz Bajorat's body was found inside, and it was in a state of severe decomposition. The autopsy of Bajorat revealed that his death was due to natural causes. He had likely died from a heart attack or another health issue. However, The state of his body indicated that the boat had been abandoned for a significant amount of time. The decomposition was due to the effects of the ocean and weather conditions, and the body gave the impression that it had been there for a while. The autopsy showed that Bajorat's death occurred much later than the time of the boat's disappearance. This revealed the long silence left behind by a life drifting at sea for years. The discovery on the shores of the Philippines raised numerous questions in everyone's minds. Was Manfred Fritz Bajorat alone on his boat? Was there a story of loneliness and hopelessness behind his disappearance and long time lost at sea? What had he experienced during those years? These were the remaining pieces of the puzzle. Manfred Fritz Bajorat's lost years. When Bajorat's body was found, this tragic discovery carried a sense of great darkness and loneliness on one hand, while offering an opportunity to follow the traces of a survival struggle on the other. The examination of the boat revealed traces of Bajorat's solitary years. The boat appeared well preserved up to a certain point, but over time some of the items and materials aboard had been used, leaving signs of a fight for survival. Some clues inside Bajorat's boat showed that he had truly fought hard for survival. Maps, old navigation tools, food and water supplies, and the boat's logs all pointed to the fact that Bajorat had made significant efforts to survive alone on the sea for years. His struggle for survival was not only against the sea and nature, but also against the internal challenges he faced. The items inside the boat were evidence that he had to face this difficult battle alone. However, the investigations and examinations revealed the cause of Bajorat's death. The fact that he had likely died from a heart attack or another health issue meant that his last years had been spent in loneliness, but he had still tried to survive in some way. His experiences during the time he went missing or after his disappearance were extreme enough to test the endurance of any human. A person being able to survive alone at sea for years symbolized the determination and strength required to stay alive. But Bajorat's death also showed that survival was not just about overcoming physical challenges, it also pushed the mental and emotional boundaries of isolation. At that time, the loneliness Bajorat experienced during his disappearance and his struggle for survival had left traces in his boat. No one knew exactly how the boat had drifted for so many years at sea, or how Bajorat had tried to survive alone. This was a void left behind by a quest and struggle. There was a kind of subconscious fear and deep loneliness behind his disappearance. The boat and the body symbolized his lost years. The question of how Bajorat lived in his final years became more intriguing with each passing day. His loneliness during the years spent on the boat was an experience shared with no one, perhaps not even with another human being. Manfred Fritz Bajorat's death, surrounded by great silence, came from the depths of the ocean. This marked the end of a lost man's once solitary journey at sea, and the beginning of a search to follow the traces of everything he had left behind. After Bajorat's death, further investigations were conducted to understand his lost years, the deep loneliness he endured, and his fight for survival. However, after all the struggles and everything that transpired, one thing was clear. Manfred Fritz Bajorat had been alone throughout the years he spent on the oceans, and somehow he had managed. The place where his boat and body were found stood as a monument to how strong the human instinct to survive can be, and how little one needs to stay alive. Philippine authorities in the area where the boat was discovered spoke of the inadequacy of the rescue efforts. Initially, when the boat washed ashore, the local maritime teams had investigated the situation. However, the boat was abandoned, and after it washed up on the shore, many questions arose. The story of a man who had spent decades alone at sea, deliberately keeping himself distant from others and fighting for survival, only appeared to those around him as a story of disappearance. But looking back, Bajorat's boat had drifted for 7 years before reaching the shore, and this was a symbol of his survival instinct, which belonged solely to him. During this time, Bajorat demonstrated how little one needs to survive. Living in the deep oceans on his own, he kept everything necessary for survival to a minimum. His environment, with constantly changing weather conditions and the fierce waves of the ocean, forced him to deal with every circumstance that tested his survival instinct. The time Bajorat spent surviving symbolized an inner strength shaped by determination. This was not just a physical survival fight but also a mental one. Some objects and diaries found on the boat carried traces of Bajorat's struggle for life. Maps, ocean routes, and old navigation devices were documents proving that he had spent years trying to cross the oceans alone. These were signs that with great determination, he tried to survive every step of the way. The water and food supplies on the boat showed that even under these difficult conditions, Bajorat demonstrated how little one needs to survive. He continued to survive by living in harmony with nature and simultaneously resisting the cruelty of nature. Bajorat's survival during these long journeys was the clearest proof of his immense willpower. Each passing day while fighting the ocean's violent waters, he was not only physically struggling, but also psychologically battling. Loneliness created increasing pressure as time went on. The length of time and the years spent in solitude tested his inner strength. Yet despite this, there was a power in beginning each day anew and continuing to survive after every hardship. Manfred Fritz Bajorat's prolonged loneliness and struggle for survival proved his resilience. This was not just a physical survival battle, it was also a mental resistance. Could a person really survive alone on the oceans for 7 years? This was a huge question. However, Bajorat left behind an example proving how possible it is to survive with loneliness and determination. The determination in his life showed not only survival, but also the resistance to living in complete isolation from the outside world. Surviving those long years at sea wasn't just about accomplishing physical feats, but also about finding the strength within oneself. The human body is very strong, but sometimes for survival, a person must push the limits of their psychological strength. Bajorat's determination was the fruit of a journey driven by his survival instinct, a decision to stay alone during that period. Survival and having something to survive with was the greatest question Bajorat faced during those 7 years. Every corner of his boat, every piece of it, bore the marks of those years. These marks symbolized the effort he made to survive and showed how he continued to live with just a little food, a little water, and minimal help, all with great perseverance and determination. Indeed, Bajorat's will to live was proof of how strong survival instincts and the human spirit can be. Bajorat's struggle for survival was not just the story of a man's experience, but also an example of how much a person can push their limits. It became a symbol of survival through determination and faith. Manfred Fritz Bajorat had vanished into the depths of the ocean, but in doing so, he left the world with a great lesson through his unyielding will to survive. When Bajorat disappeared, he wasn't just a man, but also the first spark of what would become a sailor's legend. His disappearance, along with many questions and speculations, evolved into a search for a man who had once vanished, and some saw it as a kind of conscious escape, while others speculated that Bajorat might have grown tired of the hardships and loneliness in his life, possibly seeking an escape into the ocean. Others imagined that he had disappeared due to an accident and had naturally passed away. However, these interpretations were never definitively confirmed. It was almost impossible to clearly understand what had happened behind his disappearance during that period. There were few traces of his boat, and so much time passed without any news that the belief that Bajorat had truly gone missing became a certainty over time. However, this uncertainty and lack of information also laid the foundation for a legend. Because during the years he was missing and the subsequent investigations, the findings left a mysterious air behind the story. Bajorat's disappearance, in one sense, was dramatic and striking, but in another sense, it became an inspiring tale. As time passed, questions about whether he was still alive when he vanished, how a man could survive in the depths of the ocean, and his rediscovery after disappearing, inspired countless maritime legends. Manfred Fritz Bajorat's story will be remembered as the tale of a man lost at sea, but not just as a missing person. He would also be remembered as a man who continued to survive. When his boat was found 7 years later, the truths that emerged partly solved the mystery of his disappearance. However, his survival during those years laid the foundations of a survival legend. His continued existence became an inspiring lesson about how isolation, challenges, and the unknown world of the sea could be overcome. It wasn't just about physical survival. It was also an example of the psychological resilience involved in survival. Bajorat's 7 years of disappearance were a process of dealing with loneliness, struggling for life, and discovering his inner determination. During this time, his tenacity and survival allowed him to discover the deepest strength within and use it under the toughest conditions. The place where his boat drifted and was found became a symbol not only of a missing man's story, but also of the power of the human spirit. Manfred Fritz Bajorat's lost years were not just a disappearance. They were an epic of a life struggle. A man who fought nature at every step, relying solely on himself to survive, gradually became a legend. The years in which he vanished and was later found became proof of the strength of survival for a man left alone in the depths of the sea. This story became a lesson about how sailors face loneliness, fear, and death, yet learn how precious life is. The truth behind Bajorat's disappearance and the discovery afterward showed that even in what seemed like an impossible situation, a person could survive. The survival instinct became a symbol of how humans could overcome any hardship to stay alive, even under the most challenging conditions. And ultimately, the discovery of his boat on the shores of the Philippines proved that he was not just a lost man, but a man who had become a legend. Although Bajorat seemed lost during those years, he had actually transformed into a kind of legend, showing the world that survival is not just a physical achievement, but also a mental victory. He was much more than a missing person. He was a symbol of survival, willpower, and inner strength. Over time, his story would be remembered not just as the tale of a lost man, but as the legend of survival and the power of the human spirit. The discovery of Manfred Fritz Bajorat's body 7 years after his disappearance on the shores of the Philippines not only raised questions about the investigations following his disappearance, but also brought up deep reflections on the limits of human survival instincts and psychological resilience, the challenges he faced during those lost years, his loneliness and the days spent fighting consciously, became an example of how resilient a person can be and how one can survive even in the worst conditions. Bajorat's lost years reflected his character and inner strength. While struggling to survive alone in the ocean with his boat, his perseverance and efforts to push physical and emotional limits meant confronting not only nature, but also his own fear and despair. For 7 years, what kept Manfred Fritz Bajorat? At first glance, the discovery of Bajorat's boat drifting and eventually washing ashore in the Philippines might have seemed like the simple finding of a lost man. But beyond this discovery, the event revealed something far more profound. Bajorat's final years of isolation and his struggle to survive alone demonstrated how, even under extreme conditions, a person could continue to survive. This was also an example of how great a role inner strength can play in survival. The hardships Bajorat experienced during his time lost forced him, as a sailor, to battle loneliness, nature, and most importantly, the emptiness within himself. The years he spent missing, and his fight to survive, symbolized how powerful the human spirit can be and how a person can fight with their survival instincts even in the most challenging circumstances. Over time, Bajorat's story became not just the tale of a lost man, but also a symbol of survival determination, human will, and inner strength. This event became a legend in the maritime world, particularly showing how difficult survival struggles can be, while also offering a lesson to a wider audience about the power of the human spirit. Bajorat's story demonstrated not only how physical limits can be pushed, but also how important psychological resilience is. Difficulties, loneliness, and fear can take something from a person at every moment, but sometimes such disasters can reveal a person's hidden strength. Manfred Fritz Bajorat's resistance to survive throughout all these years gave him strength, and that is evident. Bajorat's story taught that survival is not just a battle against nature and external factors, but also a battle with inner strength. People often question how physically strong they are, but to survive, it is not enough to rely solely on physical strength. It is through discovering the strength within that a person can endure. This inner strength develops during the survival process and represents a fight not just against external threats, but also against the fears inside oneself. It was equally striking to witness how Bajorat's story transformed into a legend after His 7 lost years. Initially known as a missing sailor, Manfred Fritz Bajorat began to be remembered over time as a hero who continued to survive and battle nature. After the years he was lost, it wasn't just his physical survival that stood out, but also his psychological survival, which garnered widespread attention. The reason people recognized and respected him was not just because of his survival story, but also because of how he discovered his inner strength and his determination to overcome adversity. In conclusion, Manfred Fritz Bajorat's lost years and survival struggle offer valuable lessons about the strength a person can exhibit in the face of challenges and adversities. His story highlights not only his physical endurance, but also the power of the human spirit. The way hardships and loneliness can shape the human soul, and the strength of survival instincts are clearly embodied in Bajorat's narrative. After Bajorat's disappearance, his story will be remembered not just as the tale of a lost man and a sailor who survived disaster, but also as a legend of a person discovering their inner strength and resilience while facing nature and external forces. His life and struggle serve as a reminder of how a person can overcome any obstacle and how survival instincts can keep a person alive, even in their most hopeless moments.